I see at the moment that there are 100 people now in the room. Some are still missing, but I think it's time, and I kind of propose let's start this kind of quick intro and then go into our main topic today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, number is picking up. More than 100 now already.
Great.
I am Elar Killumets, and I'm kind of glad to see you here. The raising numbers, and to kind of frame today's topic and why me and Lynn we invited Gervase to speak to us about that is that my regular daily job is to help owners and managers to build better companies. Actually, in times of if things are not changing that fast, it's a fairly simple task, meaning that to make sure that both the owners, the societies, the workers, the managers, they're all happy. However, if the speed of change goes up, then something happens, something kind of a very, very human, and the decision made then, they are not that effective anymore. What I'm referring to more quite specifically is that I see today that there is kind of a tendency in today's crisis that let's turn back to the command and control. And in a way, it makes sense, meaning that you have a very fast decisions. It's kind of there is a leader, visionary leader who knows what to do and how to do things. The bad news is that what the research shows and actually what the practice of organizational development and change management shows, this is kind of the worst thing to do. However, there's a good news, two ones actually. First good news is that the other way is actually, it's not that much, it's not a rocket science. It can be done by everyone. And even better news is that through our cooperation with some leadership training program, we have a connection to Gervase Bushe, who has managed to kind of make this other way very kind of tangible and understandable. So today we'll see how to do it actually. What's the other way to managing during times of rapid change? And now I'm giving you Lynn, please.
Yeah. Thank you. I would also like to start off by saying warm welcome to all of our viewers, to our Swedish viewers. The response on this webinar has been amazing. Hopefully that means that a lot of you, managers, leaders, HR partners are finding the theme of this webinar relevant. And probably that a lot of you are right now thinking on what is the right way to lead in practice. And that is what we will try to find out today during this webinar with a help of you, Gervase, hearing your perspectives. My name is Lynn Staberg. I am a chartered organizational psychologist. I represent the company Province 5, the 5th province. I know that a lot of our viewers are already familiar with Province 5, but for those who don't know us yet, we are organizational consultants working in the organizational and leadership development field. And Province 5 was founded 20 years ago, and we work as a strategic partner to leaders, managers, and HR. And today we are currently 8 employees, so I have 7 really competent colleagues, organizational consultants. And Province 5 and you, Gervase, has collaborated for quite a while now, over a decade. Mm-hmm. And we have followed your work closely during the year and the years, and adapted a lot of your views on leadership and leadership training into our consultation and how Province 5 looks upon leadership and how we train leaders. And in 2004, we took your leadership program, Clear Leadership, to Sweden, mm-hmm. and translated it into the Scandinavian context. And today, over 7,000 leaders have taken the course. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
For those of you who haven't taken the Clear Leadership course, it's a program where managers get to train a lot of the skills that we are going to talk about today, actually, on how to build strong partnerships based on dialogue, trust, and agreement made upon mutual understandings. whether it is with your colleague, your employees, or the customers of your organization. There's also a lot of communication skills training in the Clear Leadership program.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, just like Elar said, today's topic is going to be about how to lead in a crisis. That is what we will ask you about, Gervase. The format of this webinar is the form of an interview where me and Elar will take turns in asking you questions that we think that our viewer would like to hear your thoughts on.
Okay.
We have 60 minutes. And I can say that it is possible to write down comments and questions in the chat forum. We probably won't have time to ask so many of your questions, but it gives us a temperature on what you're thinking right now in regards to this crisis. So it's interesting for us to hear. Okay, yeah?
Yeah, and there is a good chance that if we see that some kind of comments or ideas or things you want more of are similar, then in a week there will be another webinar which will tackle those issues more kind of closely and precisely.
Yes, that's a possibility.
To comment and to give your ideas what you want to have more of from the topic we're covering today.
So, okay, Gervase, please introduce yourself and perhaps tell us a little story about how you became interested in studying leadership in crisis, because I know that you have done a lot of research on the subject.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to say hi to, good afternoon to everybody in Europe. It's early morning here in Vancouver, where I'm a professor of leadership and organization development at the Beatty School of Business. And, you know, back when the dinosaurs roamed the planet and I was a doctoral student, I was involved in a large research project studying the Civil Service Reform Act that Ronald Reagan did in the US, where they eliminated a lot of people. And this was pretty new to be laying off large numbers of people. And you know, what we discovered was that the impact on the morale and the productivity and you know, of the people who were left behind was really bad. And we developed a model at the time we called sort of the organizational crisis syndrome, and we were talking about survivor guilt and these sorts of things. And since then, there's just been a lot of research on how to not do layoffs well. Typically, most layoffs result in much worse performance in the medium term for both the employees left over and the organization. And when I came to be a professor in Vancouver, we had a CEO of a forest products company come and give a talk at the school, and he claimed that they had come out of the recession, the 1980 recession, with more commitment, more productivity than they went in. And I thought, I don't believe this. I have to go check this out. So he let me come in and I interviewed 20, 30 people, and sure enough, they had. And you know, what they had done was really quite different from what most organizations at that time were doing. And some of the key things I learned from that were, you know, one of the first things that happens when a crisis occurs is the tops tend to pull back and they go into the back room and they huddle and they start making decisions about what to do. And instead, what Champion did was they immediately, when they saw the crisis coming over the horizon, they immediately started to broadcast to the whole organization, you know, this is the crisis we see coming. This is what we think is going to happen. So they immediately started communicating with people about what they thought was really going to happen. That was the first thing they did differently. The second thing that happens is typically when the crisis hits, people start looking for solutions. And there's often, when it comes to layoffs in particular, an attempt to kind of, or budget cuts or that sort of thing, sort of equalize the pain. So, you know, a couple of years earlier, I'd been on the OD staff at General Motors, and I'd watched as GM was going through that recession, and they were doing sort of like, you know, 10% budget cuts across the board, that sort of thing. And what would the impact that would have on people in the organization is they would say, well, you know, this is crazy. By cutting us off, you're actually cutting your nose off, because we're what's producing, you know, profits right now, or, we need more of this, not less of this, or we could use a lot less of that, and there's this attempt to create a sense of fairness by sort of treating everyone the same, which ends up, and I'll talk a minute about that, not having that impact at all. But what they did at Champion was they actually engaged the workforce. They said, look, this is what we think is going to happen. This is how bad we think it's going to be. We're not going to be able to, keep everybody employed at the level you're employed now. And what we need you to do is tell us what you think we need to do about that. And they had things happen, like they had one whole group that was a specialized IT group that had been created to develop some new IT that was pretty much done. They said, you know what, you don't really need us anymore. And they had another area where they yeah.
Come again. Are you saying that people themselves said that, listen, our department at the moment is not needed for the company, please kind of remove us?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
They actually said that,
Okay.
I know. Now, I'm not saying that's always going to happen, but in this case, it did. Now, partially, I think, that's because it was a very highly professional, specialized group that, could easily find new jobs. They were a pretty scarce resource, so it wasn't that scary for them. But another thing that went on is, for example, they had a small little part of their business, the new fiber board that they were creating, and it was really where all their profits were coming from at that time. And so they decided to actually invest in that. So at the same time as they were pulling back and retrenching in some of their operations, they were actually spending money and growing, other parts of their operation. The message I went away from that is that, using a crisis is an opportunity to actually build the strength of your organization. But it really depends on how leaders respond to it. And, the key, there's a couple of key pieces to this. And one of them is something that researchers have been studying now quite extensively. It's called procedural justice. And I'm just going to put up a slide for folks to look at here. Where is that? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Can you see that? Distributive justice?
There is a 20-second delay.
It's not up. So let's see if I said share application window. No, this one. And that's not it. I thought we had this figured out yesterday. Are you seeing that? Well, let me tell you. Let me just talk about it.
Put it away.
Yeah. Distributive justice is a belief that the outcomes are fair. And I think when a lot of people think about fairness, they think about it in those terms. Has everybody got their piece of the pie, sort of thing? And it turns out that really has very little relationship with people's sense of motivation and commitment. But what does is something called procedural justice. And that's a belief that the process has been fair. And research has shown over and over again that when organizations have to make difficult decisions that are going to have a negative impact on people, if you do it in a way that people experience as fair, then the people who are left after a layoff, for example, don't feel survivor guilt, and they don't distrust the organization, and so on and so forth. And it can even have a positive impact on the people who are negatively impacted. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So there are three key aspects to sustaining employees bringing their best effort during a crisis, which is, the thing you most need. You're in a crisis. That's when you most need people to step up and bring their best game and really, care about the success of the organization. And so to do that, decisions have to be, number one, the people need to understand the criteria that are being used to make these kind of decisions. So we can call that transparency. So what criteria is being used to decide who gets laid off? What criteria is being used to decide which budgets are cut? What criteria is being used to decide how we allocate resources? People need to understand that criteria. That's number one. And then the second thing is that they need to perceive those criteria being applied consistently. We could call that being unbiased, right? So I want to understand why you're doing what you're doing, and I want to believe that you're actually applying those in a consistent manner. And then for the strongest effects, The third element is engagement. And that means that people feel they've had an opportunity to provide input into those criteria, and they understand why the ultimate decisions were made. I may not totally agree with them, but I had a chance to have a kick at the can. I understand why you made the decisions you made. They're clear to me why the criteria you're applying, and you're applying them in a consistent and unbiased way. And when I see that, then I perceive the organization as having procedural justice, and that I can believe, I can believe in my leaders. I can trust them. I feel more connected to the organization. I feel more commitment to it. And I would say to leaders, the simplest way to think about it is this: the easiest way to create a sense of we-ness is to find a common enemy, right? And a time of crisis offers that opportunity. So in this case, it's the coronavirus. Here's an opportunity to bring your organization together around a common enemy. It's this coronavirus. It's a scary thing. It's going to impact us in negative ways. And I can use that to rally the troops if I'm willing to engage them and to be transparent around what I'm thinking and what's going on and how I'm making sense of things, and to engage people in helping to figure out what we're going to do together.
Gervase,
Yeah.
So the positive side of this crisis is that it is a possibility for organizations to be stronger and to learn and to engage employees. But as Elar told us in the introduction, faced with crisis and critical problems, a lot of leaders tend to fall back to a command and control type of leadership, to be authoritative, to take control of the situation, to with a steady hand show the organization which way to go.
Right.
And also a lot of employees are asking for that type of leader.
Right.
But you say that is not really a good idea. Why not?
Well,
you were talking about
and
involvement.
The second piece to this is, that's great. Like being a command and control leader, taking charge, getting everybody out of the theater while it's on fire. Fantastic if you know the solution to the problem, right? But this is the second piece. Everybody has to admit to themselves and admit to others that this is a situation of incredible uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. Nobody knows what the government's going to do next. Nobody knows what this virus is going to do next. We don't know. I don't know what it's like in Europe. Here in North America, in Canada, what's going down in the States is a little crazy, but what's going on in Canada is for about 10 days now, I'd say, most people have been staying home. But I think there's some people who think, well, that's only going to be another week or two, and I think anybody who thinks that has not been paying attention to what really is going on here. How much longer we're going to have to physically distance and work remotely, nobody knows that. Is somebody going to invent a cure for this thing in a few weeks, or is it going to take years? Nobody knows that. So like one of my clients right now, what's going on there is it's a fairly large organization, and they're just trying to sort their heads around how they work remotely. And one part of the organization, they've let all their employees basically go home. And another part of the organization, they're trying to bring the employees in, and the union, is saying, "Hey, this is no fair. They get to go off and they get paid sitting around, and we got to work." And I mean, it's just the problems and the knock-on effects are unpredictable, and so and we know about how to lead effectively in that sort of where volatile, uncertain, ambiguous. That's what I've been writing about for the past 10 years, this thing I call generative leadership, which is in those kind of situations, the most effective way to lead is to, as a leader, not to show up and say, I know the answer, follow me. It's to say, I know the question, I know the problem, I can identify it, and I'm going to engage the people who are going to have to solve this in conversations to figure out what to do. And we're going to try a bunch of things, and we're going to learn as we go. But, as you say, people are looking to their leaders to tell us what to do, give me direction. And a lot of that is coming out of the anxiety. And it would be great to have somebody who actually knew the answer and is willing to come forward and say, I know the answer, follow me. And somebody who says that is probably going to create followership, but whether or not they really know the answer. And here's another thing I learned from the champion study was, you have to be right. If you're making predictions about what's going to happen next, if you're right, then you generate a lot of trust and a sense of followership. But if you keep showing up as wrong, and you can see this happening to Donald Trump right now, where he
Charles, I interrupt you here.
People don't trust him. Yeah.
I am saying that actually, even though if leaders feel the pressure from their people that, yeah, you do something and you tell us what to do, they should actually resist it.
That's a what?
They should actually resist this kind of pressure.
Tell me what to do. I think what leaders need to do right now to give people some sense that somebody knows what's going on is not to try to provide answers, but to provide a process, to be clear about here's the process, here's the structure. So here's how we're going to get through this together, right? We're going to have these conversations. They're going to happen at these times. These are the sort of issues we're going to call it. Here's who's going to get involved. We're going to keep adapting and learning as we move along. So I can provide a clarity of process, and find ways to engage people so that they feel like they're a part of the solution. And when we do that, people come up with amazing solutions, and they're much more willing to sacrifice for the collective good. Than if somebody comes along and tells them what to do, or this is how it's going to be. And because part of what leaders need to understand is you're not just dealing with the immediate problem. You're dealing with, this will pass 6 months, a year from now. What kind of organization do you want to be 6 months or a year from now? Right? And what you do now is going to affect that in big ways.
Gervase, on that matter, the initial response from a lot of organizations right now is to pause or postpone all developmental activities, whether it has to do with working with strategic important questions or developmental activities for the management team, leaders, employees. There is obviously a need to handle things right here and right now, and that you can really respect organizations for. But do you have some thoughts on how organizations can balance the need to take care of urgent matters right now and still dare to look into the future? Because I think developmental activities are signaling hope of the future, and all of us probably need a glimpse of that right now. Do you have a thought on this balance?
Well, I think you have to staunch the bleeding. So, there's a need to pay attention to what's immediately in front of us and be able to get organized, because especially with this particular crisis, most of all my clients have never dealt with anything like this before. So, everybody, so there's a certain period of kind of chaos as people are just trying to get their head around what are we going to continue to do? Number one, what's essential? And I think that's part of the work of leadership right now, is to clarify what is essential, what is our core purpose, right? And all the sort of generative, and I have a number of ideas around things that you can be doing right now, given this specific problem, because most engagement strategies involve bringing people together into conversations, and we can't do that because all the remoteness that's going on. So we need to get that immediate sense of what's core to what we need to be doing right now, and just get a sense that, okay, we're starting to get organized, we're starting to move along. Now, once we've got that, then this is a huge developmental opportunity. There's all sorts of things. The possibility to be learning as we go is inherent in any sort of effective response to this situation. We have to be learning as we go, right? And so, and whether or not, by developmental opportunities, you mean, is it time to, start doing more training or not? Again, that depends on, have we got enough stability and platform in what it is we need to do that we're able to keep doing that. But I think for most organizations, the problem right now is they're trying to figure out, the ones that are enlightened, that understand, like, what we need to do is spend more time communicating and more time engaging and more time in conversation and more time listening. How do we do that in now in a remote context? That's a very new problem. And I think solutions to that are emerging all over the place. And so, and that is what a generative change approach is about. It's about believing that solutions will emerge if you bring the right people into the right kind of container. It's believing in the power. Let me finish this. It's believing in the power of self-organization when people have a shared purpose, right? And I'll come back to this idea of purpose. Purpose is what we're here to do every day. And interestingly enough, the research out of Gallup is about 75% of employees don't even know what their company's purpose is during normal times, right? And if you try to generate, bottom-up engagement, emergent kinds of solutions and ideas, it doesn't work unless people share a common purpose, right? But when you have a group of people who share a common purpose, and let's face it, survival is probably the most primal and powerful common purpose. You have a group of people that share the desire to collectively survive. They will figure out the best ways that are possible to do that if you get out of the way. Self-organization is a natural property of all living systems. It's how nature evolves. And so, but the key thing for leaders is to be able to frame what that purpose is. Here's what we're here to do. And maybe the company has, a purpose, but in the midst of this crisis that we're in right now, we may have a different purpose that we're focusing on today to get that level of stability that we need to get so that we can get back to much more normal routine. We can start thinking again about where developmentally what we need to do with our people and our organization and that sort of thing. So,
Gervase, you were talking about the importance of leaders not having all the answers, but having a process where they engage people in conversations and questions where leaders need to hear everyone's voice to be able to solve them. In what questions and conversations should a leader involve his or her employees?
Right. Well, so I think the answer to that question depends a lot on context. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's one thing if you're a leader of thousands of people. It's another thing if you're a leader of 10 people. Right. So these scale effects have different impacts. So let's start with the simplest scenario. You're a leader of, say, 100 people or less. Right. Then I think it's quite possible to include everybody. And right. And then given that, I think there are two different kinds of issues. One is what I would call decision scenarios, and one is what I would call generative scenarios. So let's start with decision scenarios because I think those are the ones we're most comfortable with. And a decision scenario is where you need a solution. You need one solution. So for example, one of my clients right now, they're just trying to figure out how do we staff in the midst of this physical distancing. They need a solution to that. And so now there are a number of different ways now. The technology platforms are amazing. So in this case, we use Zoom, right? So we brought, all the supervisors and all the general managers into a conversation. And for the first thing is, one of the things that's going on, talk about developmental. So we're using the crisis as an opportunity to push the adaptive capacity of the organization, which is what we've been trying to do anyway, but this has opened up an opportunity. So we brought in the unionized crew leads into that conversation on a Zoom platform, and we let them figure it out. Now, they came up with the exact same solution that, one of the general managers could have imposed on them, but it's a completely different experience to have the crew leads come in, and have a conversation and figure out how they're going to manage their staffing requirements at this time using that sort of, right. So I think, and so one of the things we're going to experiment with next week, again, we're all trying out new stuff, is this idea of using like a Zoom room where we have the decision-making team. And I think, so this is one of the things, and regardless of, now, if we're talking about organizations where you're got, thousands of employees, In a crisis like this, most people would advise you need to develop a nerve center of some sort. So you need to identify who's the team. Maybe it's your senior team. Maybe it's a bigger team. You need to have a cross-functional, representation of the organization that's going to be ultimately making the decisions. But what we're going to experiment with is kind of a fishbowl process online. So that team will be making its deliberations transparently, and anybody who wants can come online and watch them talk, and there'll be an open chair. And if anybody wants to say something, there's a little thing you can put up your hand. I can click, I can unmute them. They come in, they get to say what they want to say, unmute them, they're out. So, this is like in face-to-face organization development work, this is a common process when you want to create transparency around decisions and you want to give a larger group of people opportunities to have input into that, understand the decisions being made and why they're being made, and be able to have a say. And so that's one way to do it. Let me offer a second one, I think, around decision. There are a number of polling apps that allow you to rapidly surface ideas amongst a large population. They're all scalable up to, I think, thousands. And one of my favorites is one called Speak Up. So the way this works is you ask a question to your population. So let's say the question is, how should we best maintain customer contact in the face of all this remote working? And anybody who has an idea writes the idea. It goes up on and everybody can access that idea, and then everybody rates the ideas. And what happens is you rapidly get ideas, and the best ideas are the ones that attract the most support, quickly raise to the surface, right? And then your decision-making team can work those ideas and be very transparent about how it's working those ideas, or even better, in a more generative move, and we can talk about, because you can use the same process in a more generative move, which we'll talk about in a minute. So, those are a couple of examples, I think, of how to be able to create much larger engagement in the midst of this particular crisis, which has this very unique problem of, we can't bring everybody together in a room, which is how we typically deal with sort of engaging folks in generative conversations to begin with.
But basically what you're saying is that it is not necessary only the management team who are best suited for making decisions for the organization. You are talking about setting up cross-functional teams with people who have different functions in the organization, like a microcosmos of the organization to make decisions.
Yeah. Well, typically a senior management team is that to some extent. It depends how it's set up. The problem with that is you're only dealing with one level. So sometimes you need to look at, like, particularly if you're a unionized organization, right now you want to have the union in your nerve center, I think, unless you have really bad relationships. But if you're going to have to make decisions that are going to impact a unionized workforce, it's just going to slow you down like crazy if they're not engaged in being a part of making the decision to start with, because you're going to get all sorts of resistance and all that sort of stuff. So, and then if you get into really large organizations, typically what happens there is you have the nerve center, but you also create clusters around specific issues. So you might have a finance cluster, a customer care cluster, a supply chain cluster, a employee protection cluster, something like that. So again, but it always comes down to those small groups. You're always breaking down into small groups, coming back into the whole, breaking down into small groups, coming back into the whole, to generate from the bottom up, ideas, because what you need right now is ideas. You need good ideas, and you need people to feel like that they're in, they're not out. That's one of the most primal things that our brains are wired for. Am I in or am I out? And if I'm out, right? So, you can either make the virus the enemy or you can make management the enemy. And if you make management the enemy, it's not going to have a long-term positive impact on your business.
Gervase,
yeah.
I'd like to go back a little, some steps. So let's assume that the situation has already happened. The crisis is there for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Let's say the tension is already up inside the company. There are rumors something probably will happen.
Yeah.
And the boss has become the common enemy.
Whoops.
To happen. So how would the first step look like? Meaning that how this difficult conversation, how the good first step looks like to start this conversation so that we could start surviving together, not seeing whom.
Well, again, all these things depend on the person, the context. It's like,
Okay.
but if you have a leader who's capable of standing out and saying, okay, these bad things have happened. This is why I've done this. You're the people I'm with now. You're us, and can demonstrate that in some tangible way. That it's not us. You're part of we now, but you can say those things, but the proof is in the pudding. What are you doing next to engage folks and give them some real ability to have an input into what's going to happen next?
Yeah, I will ask from you just to be like really bluntly clear. Let's say if I'm running out of funds, I see that I can pay salaries only 2 months. Should I say to workers or not?
Yes.
Yes,
absolutely. You need to give them the unvarnished truth, because you know what? The stories they're making up right now are as bad or worse than what's really going on, right? If you don't tell people what's going on, they have to make up a story about it. And the story and in a vacuum of information in an organization, the rumors that flood in are always worse than the reality. And if the tops are doing a PR spin and lying about what's going on, people are going to know that. So not only are they now going to be making up worse scenarios in their mind than what's really going on, they're also not going to be trusting their leaders. And this is what happened in the civil service reform thing. Like, people would come to work and they wouldn't do their work. What they did was they were looking for new jobs, creating job finding, groups amongst themselves, doing everything but their job, because their leaders had abandoned them.
Yeah. So the first step is that brutal, honest truth. If there are opportunity to pay salaries for 2 months, say it out. If you see that,
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't start there. I would say, look, here's the financial situation we're in. Okay. What is it we can do? And you'd be amazed. Like, people will come up with all sorts of stuff.
Okay.
Let me tell you a story. Okay. No, you want to go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well,
go ahead.
Yeah. So, when the last recession happened, when the financial crisis. So I'm working with a really high growth software development company, and all of a sudden they're in crisis, right? And so they bring together, and they probably had about 1,500 employees, but most of their software people are in one city, about 600, and they rent a hockey arena, bring everybody in, and they say, here's what we see the financials are. Here's what's happening in our market. This is our prediction about what's coming down the pike. Here's where we think we're going to be in about 6 months. What do you think we should do about it? And and they did something that's called an open space. And what happens in an open space is people will have a conversation they want to have, put up a sign, say, I want to talk about this. And an agenda is created bottom up from the group. People go to where they want to have a conversation, generate whatever ideas they have, and you do that a few times and stuff starts to surface. So what came out of this was a bunch of the programmers, like I think about 125 of them, decided that they would go into sales temporarily. Stop being programmers, become salespeople. And that had tremendous positive. Now, nobody had thought about, can you imagine if the tops came along and said, you're a sales guy? And I was like, you can imagine these propeller head tech guys going, hell no, I'm not. But they decided they were going to do that. And what happened was they not only generated more business, but the programmers learned a whole bunch more about the business and about what their customers really needed and all that had tremendous impact. And talk about developmental opportunities. Once, the recession was over, they came roaring out of that with a much stronger product mix, because the people who were developing the products had a whole new idea about what their customers were about. Right? So that's what I mean. The opportunities to utilize the inherent wisdom, and what are we paying salaries for? We're paying salaries for people's brains, They have brains, they have ideas, they get what's going on. They can be treated as adults, not as children who need to be kept in the dark about, how bad things really are. And as much as possible. And so this is what I would call the generative move. So the decision move is where you need one solution, and you need to figure out how to do that. The generative situation is where you really don't know what's going to work, and you have the opportunity to try a bunch of different things. And you're in, whatever the situation is, you have the opportunity to do that. And so what you want to do there is create opportunities for people with similar interests and motivations to find each other and champion a solution, and just say, try it, and try as many different things as you can and learn as you go. And then leadership's job is essential at this point, is to track what's happening, to be able to put into place feedback loops so that they can pay attention to what's working, what's not, where do we need to support something that has some real potential here, what can we learn from failure, and how do we scale up and amplify the successes that we're finding. That's what I call generative leadership.
You're using quite a lot the word generative.
Yeah.
Could you paint the metaphor where it's coming from?
Yeah.
New word
Generative is to generate, and in my research on transformational change, one of the things I've discovered is that typically they involve something I've been calling a generative metaphor or a generative image. But and that's led me to then start thinking of and looking at, well, what is generative leadership? And generative means creating a space where new ideas and new ways of doing things can surface and get acted on. And so a generative leader is someone who says, I don't know the answer, but I know the problem, and I'm going to create opportunities to bring the right mix of people together and the right kind of conversations to generate as many new ideas and possibilities. And then instead of me going away as a leader and now say, okay, I'll take all your great ideas, I'll decide what the good ones are, we'll implement those. And then you're back to this sort of resistant, laden, plan change approach, trying to push a rope. You say to everybody who's got an idea, good, just go do it. Just go do it. Now, to make that work, you need to set up guardrails. So you need to say ahead of time, any solution we come up with, can't do this. It can't increase headcount. It can't, whatever the guardrails are. Or in this case, it might be, has to, acknowledge the realities of a diminishing budget or, whatever it is. And so you set up the guardrails and you say, but anything that is and you clarify the purpose. So here's the purpose. Here's the guardrails. What's your best shot? Whatever you want to do, go do it. We'll support it. And, and then to pay attention to what works, to get behind it. Now, this approach has shown up in the strategy literature for about the past 25 years. And the research is it's the most effective way to manage in complexity, where nobody knows what the right answer is. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. Generally organizations in complex environments that have a vision and make a big bet, they lose because, again, no one knows what's going to happen next. But the ones that win are the ones that make a lot of little bets. Try this, try this, try this, try this. Oh, that worked. Okay, let's make a bet on this now, and just learn as you go. So that would be my general sort of message is there are two kinds of situations. There's a decision situation, you need a solution. Okay, that there are ways to engage people in that, but ultimately you're going to need to have some decision body. And that's the other thing, way important to have a group with a variety of points of view who feel like they have the authority to disagree with the boss, so to speak. Because, one of the effects of power, and this has been shown, consistently in research, is overconfidence. People who have authority, people who have power tend to be more confident and are more likely to take incorrect moves than a group that's allowed to, actually be free willing and allow for diversity and conflict and all that sort of stuff. But then there are generative situations where you don't need one answer. You can try a lot of different things, and it would even be better if you did. And then what you want to do is, again, create engagement, but create engagement, the purpose of which is not to come to convergence, but to allow a lot of divergence, allow a lot of different things to happen. and then really pay attention. That's critical. You need to really pay attention and follow up behind it, and work with the momentum that you generate.
The generative process that you talk about, Gervase, has a lot of positive effects, I think. One is that you solve difficult problems that you need to solve.
Yeah.
And you also learn as you go ahead.
You learn, and you're building partnership. You're building a sense of we-ness.
Yeah.
You're creating a more adaptive organization that's going to be much, it's going to be in a better position once the crisis is over to really roar forward. Right?
Yeah. And I think it's really important that organizations remind themselves of not just thinking that after the crisis, let's learn from this. We have to learn during the crisis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also another thing about involvement that you speak so warmly about, I think that in these worrying times, many people feel that they lose control of things, and losing control of things have really negative effects, we know, on our motivation and the basic psychological needs for humans. And involving employees, I think, make them feel that they are in control of things that they can control. There are things that I actually can do something about.
Yeah,
and that I think rises the autonomic motivation and also makes them more engaged and responsible for the future of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And another point of that is like there's both the sense of losing control and the sense of needing to control. And I think both of those are part of anxiety, and anxiety is the greatest stumbling block here, right? People operating out of their anxiety, and especially when leaders are feeling anxiety driven to do something, or feeling the anxiety from others to tell us what to do. The ability to sort of be a non-anxious presence in the middle of that is one of the best predictors of successful leadership. And I understand you guys have been doing some webinars on how to manage your anxiety, and I mean, there's a lot of information out there about that and coping strategies and that.
Yeah,
absolutely essential.
I wanted to say that actually those from Sweden, Province Fem, are doing online webinars about anxiety and how to deal with that. And I will also be having an English online seminar in Europe very soon. So
good. I think
what it looks like, but basically, if you're saying non-anxious present, actually you're meaning that I'm as a leader, I'm telling that, okay, this is the situation, this is our finances, this is our reserves.
This is our market, this is what's happening with our competitors.
This is what's happening with a customer, and it's all on the table, and let's now sit down and we have in between those boundaries or limitations, let's start solving what to do this, whether it's reduction, whether it's a salary decrease, whether it's entering new market, whether it's kind of working on something else, but it's a kind of a conversation that will happen not inside the C-suite or top management or owner level, but it's something that will be happening inside the whole organization. And so presence is that me as a leader, I am kind of confident in bringing this onto the table. Let's discuss it. And your experience actually is that people are they're coming along.
As long as they share a common purpose.
Yeah.
Right. As long as they share a common purpose. I think so you think about it, like what purpose is what we're here to do every day. When the leadership group has a vision and a plan, they've essentially decided on the way they want to accomplish that purpose. But every purpose, there are a lot of different ways to accomplish a purpose. Now, right? Like a common purpose might be in the midst. So the client system I'm working with right now, we've been working on what is our purpose right now, and what and they're still working through it. But I think where they're going to land up is something like, our purpose is to maintain the operations of the organization in a remote environment. So that's what we're trying to do every day. Maintain the operations of the organization in a remote environment. They're a part of a much larger organization. So once they clarify that for themselves, okay, then you can start to engage people. How do we do that? Right? And the people know what the problems are. So now, this is assuming that the people they're going to invite in share that purpose. And I think that's a next part of being good at identifying purposes. It's not just your purpose. It has to be a purpose that animates the whole group. And one of the great things about a crisis, especially one that is challenging your survival, is, collective survival is probably the most primal human purpose, and there's something in our DNA that makes us want to rally around that collectively, or split into tribes. But tribes exist, again, because they experience themselves as being we. So who's we? How do we create a sense of we? And if we can get that we, then we can let go of control, because the larger group will self-organize much more effectively and much more rapidly than any command and control sort of structure can do.
In this to be able to work, I think that it's really possible that you have a leadership based on trust.
Yeah.
And you are talking about something called sense making, that you are saying in times of crisis, there is a quite big gap for us to sense make about things that we don't know anything about. And I think it also stresses our relationship in different ways. Do you have any key takeaways to managers on how they can stay leading in a way based on trust, even because today a lot of managers don't see their employees every day since they are at home.
Right.
They don't have that follow-up chat every day. So there are a lot of open up for sense making. How can they stay in touch with this trust-based leadership in these times?
I think the simplest way is to say something like, every day at 11 a.m., I'm going to be on Scoop or WebEx or whatever, and I'm going to give a State of the Nation address, and I will answer any questions for half an hour, something like that. So, anybody writing about crisis leadership, the first thing they'll say is you need to communicate way more than you normally do, and if it wasn't this remote problem, it would be like, I would be advising, get out with the troops, wander around, be seen, touch people, thank them for being there, and be doing that on a daily basis. But, so now we got to figure out a way to do that remotely. But I think the technology is there to do that. It's not rocket science. But
I'm seeing that we are closing to an end, and I wanted to kind of start wrapping things up. I remember several times when we spoke about this webinar, you said that what's there to talk about? Let's do 30 minutes. It's so easy. But nevertheless, I am getting comments and questions how to do this and how to do that.
Yeah.
So it's actually, even though I've seen it happening, I have done it myself, and it's not actually that easy. So, and what I like about your work, or basically work that is being done in organization development, is that all the professors, they're also consultants, or consultants are professors. It's kind of this is what you preach. So we were talking about it, and you agreed that I'm just putting up an offer in this webinar, that you agreed to take one company that you would mentor the CEO, whatever the size of the company is, how to set those processes up, how to bring people into conversation, how to keep up the conversation, how to kind of start building this.
Well, yeah, I don't know if it's just one company. I'm open. I mean, this is part of we're all in, right? We're all in an emergent kind of situation. I typically, I consult to leaders who want to create great organizations. That's what I'm interested in. That's what organization development is interested in. I'm not a business. Issues around how to find money and how to find credit, and I don't know anything about that. What I know about is people and organizing, and my skill set is around helping leaders and change agents plot a structure, plot a process to get from point A to point B. So I consult around that. But typically, well, up until now, I only agree to do that if I can be on site, I can be with a team, I can kind of get a sense of what's going on and how things are, because there's no formula to this. It's always different. Depends on the people and the situation and the context and the limitations. But, we're all being called to do things differently now. So I am open to the possibility of trying to do that remotely with a few clients that are new. And so if somebody's interested, my advice on how to...
For your listeners, if you would like to have Gervase mentoring you and setting up the things that we have been talking about today, then click the offer, grab it, and if you have a conversation or sees that you really want to do something great, then Who knows?
Thank you, Elar.
This is the opportunity.
Okay.
Now, second, I have a request now to you who are still listening and with us. If you're thinking about those steps that Gervase was mentioning, like creating the purpose, setting up this guardrails, meaning that describing what are the limitations we're living at the moment, then bringing this limitation to people, so to start the conversation about how to kind of get out of it, how to survive together, and then having this process of probing and seeing what works, what doesn't work. If you feel that you would like to go more deeply into it, then there is an opportunity to have a webinar next week on this very narrow topic, how to do it. Maybe it will be 30 minutes only. So now is the time to put in the chat about what stage you would like to have more of the information. Maybe even some common training type of activity. So write in the chat, and if there is a common theme, we will propose that, and we will have a next session that is more narrow and more focused on only one step, maybe on this process. And for those who are here in Estonia or in Latvia or Finland, it's an opportunity to use me to set up those processes. How to do that, how it looks like. Again, it's not a rocket science, but it takes some getting used to. It takes some skill to be over your own anxiety, but it works. I think so far for me it's 100%. I don't recall any major setbacks. So it's all contact me and you can do that. And those who are in Sweden, you have Province Fem who has been practicing this already for 20 years.
Yes. Of course, to all Swedish viewers, if you have any thoughts or questions on today's theme on how to set up decision or generative processes, how you as a leader can create a more stronger organization to make your management team work more strategically and effectively in this crisis. Of course, we are more than happy to consult you and support you. And how you can involve and set up these conversations with your employees that Gervase talked about. And I would also like to just remind all leaders to take care of themselves. And Province Fem are also happy to support you with leadership coaching if there's a need for that. Tune into our webpage to learn more. And also there is a webpage for Clear Leadership course if you are curious about that program. It's www.klartledarskap.se. So, and also if you want to get in contact with Gervase, we can manage that for you, of course.
And Gervase, maybe one more kind of thing from you, that what is the main message that you would say to leaders who are already under pressure, who feel that people are already anxious inside the organization, who feel that they need to do all the things and they're kind of not feeling good?
Yeah. I would say that when there's urgency and conflict and anxiety and people are up against it, that is the most fertile ground for engaging people in open space conversations where you just bring people together. There's a few simple rules for this. If you want to know how it works, there's a TED Talk, Harrison Owen, who invented it. There's lots of stuff online. It's not hard, but it's under those conditions where open space is most effective. Because in biological systems, it's in those situations where transformation occurs, where natural systems reorganize and are able to self-organize into more complex systems to manage a new environment. So I know, it's and there are people out there that can help you do that, who have experience doing that, and it's not that hard to find them if you want to look for them. It's called, and
almost all processes today are available in a digital tool.
Yeah, I mean, both of you are prime examples of people who know how to do this kind of work, and trust your folks, and they'll trust you.
On that note, Elar,
nice ending. Sorry, Lynn.
On that note, perhaps we'll say thank you to all our viewers.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jarvis, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for making this happen. Take care.